June 12th, 1775. Off the coast of Maine, the American sloop Unity pursued the British armed vessel Margarita. Margarita? Hang on a second. Are we talking about margaritas with an American story? This is fantastic. I am so excited about it. What's that? It's not the margarita. It's the margarita. I was hoping for a margarita story, but instead we get a great maritime story. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping. It's June 12th, the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Merchant Marine. That's right. We're talking about the story of the seizure of the HMS Margarita off the coast of Maine on that fateful day 250 years ago. What better way to commemorate it than with a story about this seizure? If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. So this video is about the very first naval battle of the American Revolution, the Battle of Machias. And we're going to be using this article right here from the Revolutionary War Journal by Henry Shenenwolf, the Battle of Machias, the first naval battle of the American Revolution. It has a little bit of everything in there for you. What better way to commemorate the birth of the American Merchant Marine? All right, let's jump into this. The trade is one of the key issues of the American Revolution. The United States, or what becomes the United States, the English colonies in America, were part of that triangular trade that existed between England, Africa, and America. Machias, located in Maine near the Maine-Canadian border, was not part of Maine at the time. Instead, it was the Eastern District of Massachusetts. And when you look in here, you'll see the town Machias right here. It is up the bay, past what is today Machias Port, past East Machias, and this is the town right here. This is the bay in which all the incident we're going to be talking about took place. Now, while the Americans were part of a larger English system that operated under a system called mercantilism, this was a closed economic system. For the American colonists, there was a very big, robust trade that took place between the different colonies. And in particular, out in Maine, the Eastern District of Massachusetts, a lot of that area provided what was needed for the urban areas in and around Boston. But this is June of 1775. We're just coming out of the wintertime. And more importantly, back in April of 1775, you had the battles of Lexington and Concord. And now General Gage and his 6,500 British soldiers find themselves besieged by American militiamen from the adjoining New England colonies. However, for Machias, they're waiting for the delivery of food, and what they're doing is shipping out wood. That is their commodity. They're harvesting and felling trees in and around Maine and shipping it down to the urban centers along Massachusetts Bay. Now, since the Port Act of 1774, the Port of Boston has been closed. This is, again, another maritime entity where Americans boarded the three East India vessels, the Beaver, the Dartmouth, and the Eleanor, and threw nearly 350 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The reason for the issue was not a tariff, it was a monopoly. The Tea Act actually lowered the cost of tea for the American colonists, but it put them under a monopoly whereby they had to get their tea from the British East India Company. And for many merchants, including the likes of John Hancock, who were smuggling tea into the American colonies, that was a big problem. But now the British port was under the control of the British military. As Machias was coming out of the wintertime, they felled trees, loaded them on board two sloops, the Unity and the Polly, sailed them down to Boston, where they sold that wood, and now loaded with food, were heading back up. Both these vessels were under the control of a local merchant, Ichabod Jones. Great name, Ichabod. You don't see that too often. Not very often you run into an Ichabod anymore. But Ichabod Jones, resident of Machias, was coming back up to sell that food, buy a new consignment of wood that was needed for General Gage and the British troops down in Boston to build more barracks as troops were being hustled from England over to Boston following the attacks. Accompanying the two vessels was the HMS Margarita, 50 tons, crew of 40 on board, 4 4-pounder cannons. The 4-pounders signified the weight of shot, and several swivel guns under the command of Midshipman James Moore. General Gage wanted to ensure the transfer of food and, more importantly, the loading of lumber for his troops. Plus, they were given the mission of looking for the wreck of a ship lost back in February of 1775, the HMS Halifax. Before Jones could sell the food on board, he required the citizens of Machias to sign a petition. That petition was meant to show the loyalty of the citizens of Machias. The local committee of safety met at Burnham Tavern in the town to take a vote on whether or not they should do that. This quote from the article talks about that specific moment. On the 3rd instant, a paper was handed about for the people to sign. As a prerequisite to their obtaining any provisions of which were in great want, the contents of this paper required the signers to indulge Captain Jones in carrying lumber to Boston and to protect him and his property at all events. On the 6th, the people generally assembled at the place appointed and seemed so adverse to the measures proposed that Captain Jones privately went to the tender HMS Margaretta and caused her to move up so near the town that her guns would reach the houses. The people considered themselves nearly as prisoners of war, passed a vote that Captain Jones might proceed in his business as usual without molestation, that they would purchase the provisions he brought into the place and pay him according to contract. Now, the difference here was the decision was made by the British and Jones that food would be transferred to the citizens of Machias, but only those who vote in affirmative for the resolution. After obtaining this vote, Captain Jones immediately ordered his vessels to the wharf and distributed his provisions among those only who voted in favor of his carrying lumber to Boston. This gave such offense to the aggrieved party that they determined to take Captain Jones, if possible, and put a final stop to his supplying the king's troops with anything. So Ichabod Jones pissed off the citizens of Machias in saying that only those of you who voted for the petition will get to eat. The rest of you can starve. That fired up a batch of maniacs, citizens of Maine. One of the citizens, Benjamin Foster, decided to seize the captain of the Margarita, Midshipman James Moore, and Ichabod Jones while they attended church on Sunday. However, they saw the approach of the townspeople to the church and they fled. Jones fled into the woods and Moore and his crew fled back to the Margarita. Foster, joined by another townsman, Jeremiah O'Brien, depicted here, headed down to the wharfs to seize the Unity and the Polly. A party of settlers went directly to stripping the sloop that lay at the wharf, the Unity, and another party went off to take possession of the other sloop, the Polly. The tender Margaretta did not fire, but weighed her anchors in the dusk of the evening, fell down, and came within musket shot of the sloop, the Polly, which obliged our people to slip their cable and run the sloop aground. Mr. Moore was hailed on shore by the rebels, desiring him to strike to the Sons of Liberty, threatening him with death if he resisted. They fired a volley of small arms, which was returned from the schooner Margaretta, with swivels and small arms. The firing continued about an hour and a half. Mr. Moore then cut the cable, dropped down a half-mile lower, and anchored near a sloop laden with boards, the Polly. In the night, they endeavored to board, but were beaten off by a brisk fire. Now, at this point, the citizens of Machias can go ahead and let the Margaretta go. They've seized the Unity, they've seized the Polly, the food on board is there. They can let the British flee, but these are Americans. They are not going to let that happen. Our people, seeing the Margaretta go off in the morning, determined to follow her, about 40 men armed with guns, swords, axes, and pitchforks. Thought it was pitchforks, but I guess it's pickforks. Pickforks went in Captain Jones' sloop Unity under the command of Captain Jeremiah O'Brien. About 20 armed in the same manner and under the command of Captain Benjamin Foster went in a small schooner, the Falmouth Packet. During the chase, our people built them breastworks of pine boards and anything they can find in the vessels that would screen them from the enemy's fire. Now, there's a couple of confusing aspects of this story. Margaretta should have been able to flee the scene and outsail the Unity and the Falmouth Packet. However, there is a allegation that Moore kind of lost his way and, more importantly, tried to sail his vessel in winds that were too powerful and actually broke the gaff on the mainsail and potentially broke the yard that held the big, huge square mainsail, and that slowed him down, allowing the Unity under Jeremiah O'Brien to close on the Margaretta. The story continues. A sloop, the Unity, and schooner Falmouth Packet appeared. We immediately weighed anchor and stood out for the sea, they coming up with us very fast. We began to fire our stern swivels and small arms as soon as within reach. When within hail, they again desired us to strike to the Sons of Liberty, promising to treat us well, but if we made any resistance, they would put us to death. Mr. Moore, seeing there was no possibility of getting clear, swung the vessel to and gave them a broadside with swivels and small arms in the best manner he was able, and likewise threw some hand grenades into them. They immediately laid us on board, mortally wounded Mr. Moore, and took possession of the schooner, carrying her up to Machias in great triumph. This image gives you a great kind of depiction of that happening. You can see along Unity here that planking that had been built up to provide a screen behind which the Americans could board the vessel. Midshipman James Moore of the Margaretta was killed, along with 3 others, and 8 British were wounded. Midshipman Richard Stillingfleet surrendered the vessel and assumed command. 2 colonists were killed, along with 3 wounded. The captured crew was later turned over to the Massachusetts Provisional Congress in Worcester, and Jones was found and imprisoned. The Unity was renamed the Machias Liberty and given to Jeremiah O'Brien to command as a privateer. Now, I raise this story to you because this is the moment, this day, June 12, 1775, is where the U.S. Merchant Marine claims its origin. A batch of sailors, mariners, and colonists and townspeople, they took to several vessels, the Unity, the Polly, and the Falmouth Packet, and chased down the HMS Margaretta and eventually forced it to surrender. Now, this is not the first time this had happened. There was an incident in Rhode Island with the HMS Gaspee a few years earlier. This was seen to be the Lexington Concord at sea for the United States. If you're interested in this topic, and more importantly about the U.S. Merchant Marine, particularly during the American Revolution, I've got a couple of great recommendations for you. I have just finished reading this book right here, Eric J. Dollins, Rebels at Sea, Privateering in the American Revolution, a fantastic book. Strongly recommended. It's a great read. Dolan does a great job in covering everything regarding, but the U.S. Merchant Marine took to the seas as private men of war, both as privateers, something I'm familiar with, having attended the Maritime College where we are the privateers, and as letters of marque. And a lot of times these vessels were put together by these small coastal communities because they needed to survive, they needed trade, they needed food, much like Machias needed back here in June of 1775. So they put themselves to sea, very similar to what Viking villages did back 700 years ago. 2 other books to make you aware of that I find really interesting in this time period. One is George Washington's Secret Navy. This is by James L. Nelson, How the American Revolution Went to Sea. This is about George Washington's private navy that he put together while in command of the Continental Army around Boston. These ships were not the Continental Navy. These were private ships put together by George Washington. And then if you do want to study about the Continental Navy, which has a direct connection with the U.S. Merchant Marine because the very first ships in Philadelphia came from the U.S. Merchant Marine, and the crews did too. John Paul Jones was a merchant sailor, John Barry, Truxton, a whole slew of them. Then I really recommend here Tim McGrath's Give Me a Fast Ship, the Continental Navy and the American Revolution at Sea. Not enough discussion is given to shipping during the American Revolution. Slew of other books I could recommend, but those are the ones I really strongly suggest. So on this, the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Merchant Marine, oh man, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Until our next episode or our next anniversary of the U.S. Are we sure it's not the HMS Margarita? I mean, if it was the HMS Margarita, I mean, we'd literally be in Margaritaville right now. I really want this ship to be named Margarita. Till then, this is Sal, signing off.